the back side of this worksheet, you're definitely going to need to have your calculators out. So the first thing that you should do in your calculator is simply, let me pull up my calculator and show it to you here. So I'm going to clear off my screen here, but look for your stat key here and go to edit. And what you should do here is type in all the numbers for hours in Facebook into list 1 and type in all the test scores for list 2. You'll want to do that because it's going to make this problem a lot easier, especially for part A. Getting back to the problem here, it says, Mr. Bartz wants to see if there's a relationship between the number of hours his students spend on Facebook over the weekend and on their test scores on Monday's test. The number of hours 12 students spent on Facebook during the weekend and the scores of each student's Monday's test score is noted in the table below. So what we're going to do is make a plot of this on your calculator. So pause it, put this in, and then unpause it to continue to go. Because I'm going to keep going. So I have my data already in. So I want to make a plot of this data. So to make a plot, I go second y equals and get to my stat plots. Notice how all my stat plots are off. That's going to be important. Make sure they're all off. Only the first one that we're going to actually graph. So we're going to turn it on. So once I turn it on, I'm going to select the scatter plot because that's the type of graph that I want. And then I want to make sure I'm doing list 1 versus list 2, which hopefully it's already set up for. So once I've done that, I can go ahead and hit graph. But my graph's probably not going to show up because it's not fitting the window. So to fit the window, the fastest way of doing it is right here is this middle button that says zoom. And then if you hit the number 9, that is zoom fit. It will fit any stat or any type of data within your window. So when I take a look at this particular one, my hope and goal, once I've made my plot, what I've done in part A, is part B asks you to choose 2 points, if connected, that would fit, or that would, as it says here, fit the overall pattern of the data, and then find the slope. So the question is, what 2 points are probably the best fit? Now I try to find usually the smallest and largest points only if it fits the data pretty well. So if I hit the trace key here, this will let me jump and skip around. But I think if I choose this point with the very bottom point that's in the very bottom right, I think that would actually be a decent way to describe this data. So this point here is at 0.96, and then, whoops, my apologies. If I use my right and left arrow key, notice how it jumps all the different points for me. My second point I'm going to pick there is 1050. So my first point I picked was 0.96, and the second point I chose was 1050. Now, could you have picked some different points? Yes, you could have, and I probably have been okay with it. You probably could have picked, say that point, 765, with the first point I picked, 0.96. That'd probably still be a pretty good one also. Okay, so there are some choices. So if your answer doesn't match exactly with mine, just make sure you're following the process. It could be we just picked different points. So now, we want to find the slope. Now remember, the slope is change in y over change of x. So my slope here is going to be 50 minus 96 over 10 minus 0. So you get negative 46 over 10, or negative 4.6. So the question becomes, next, in C it says, explain the real world meaning of the slope in the context of this particular problem. So again, we're comparing hours on Facebook over the weekend to students' Monday test score. So for each additional hour spent on Facebook, that's kind of weird. Sorry about that. It's kind of acting weird. Over the weekend, a student's Monday test score decreases by 4.6 points. All right. So now, in part D, it says using your 2 points and the slope, write an equation to this line. So this is where point slope comes into play. This is where you're using this y equals y1 plus b x minus x1. So this one could have two answers depending on the 2 points you use. If you use that first point, 0.96, the equation might look like this. So again, we're going to use y hat because we're going to use this line to try to predict. So we're using the predicted y, so that's why the hat is there. So we have 96 minus 4.6 times x minus 0. Or if you use the other point, you'd have y hat equals 50 minus 4.6 x minus 10. Now I'm going to leave them in point slope form. If you distributed and simplified them, I would accept those also as an answer. So now, in part E, it says use your equation to predict the test score of a student who spent 4 hours on Facebook over the weekend. Apologize, there should be a little S there on, not 4 hour, 4 hours. So, to answer this, we just need to know that this 4 hours is the x value and we want y hat because we're trying to predict, we're trying to figure out what y hat actually is. So, if I plug it in the first equation, y hat would equal 96 minus 4.6 times 4 minus 0. Or you could have done it in the second equation and gone 50 minus 4.6 times 4 minus 10. Now, if you do this either way, you should get 77.6. And this one should be exact because the slope was not rounded or changed one single bit. So, sorry about that. But either way, it should be 77.6. So basically, what this means is a student who spent 4 hours on Facebook would have a predicted score of 77.6 points on Monday's test. Okay, so the last problem here says if a student scored an 80 on Monday's test, how many hours on Facebook will the equation to your line predict? So we want to figure how many, we want to figure out, let me switch colors here, sorry. We want X and we're given basically the predicted Y as 80. So if I use it in the first equation, 80 equals 96 minus 4.6 times X minus 0. What I can first do here is subtract 96 from both sides. So I have minus 16 equals negative 4.6x, because the 0 is going to go bye-bye. So divide by negative 4.6, and x equals 3.48. So if a student scored an 80 on Monday's exam, our line would predict that they were on Facebook for 3.48 hours over the weekend. And this finishes our assignment.